Howdy, everyone. Happy Memorial Day. It's May 30th, Monday, May 30th today. Welcome to Unsafe Space. You're watching Narrative Dissonance, which is a show we do every Monday at 2 p.m. Pacific. The time has moved, so if you're used to watching us at 11 a.m. Pacific, here we are at 2 p.m. in the future. So welcome. This is a show we do where we talk about basically what the mainstream media is getting wrong, how we're being misled, what we should be paying attention to. We try and question the mainstream narratives. You can watch us on unsafespace.com, where this is a embedded stream. All of our shows, all of our live streams are embedded and go live on unsafespace.com, or you can be on your favorite, favorite platform, YouTube, if you really want to be, or Odyssey, or Rumble, Utreon, all those. Also, you can follow us on Twitter at _unsafespace. And don't forget to share this episode or any episode, any content with a friend. You don't have to do it publicly. If you're shy about being a wrong thinker, it's okay. Send it in a DM. You can even send it and say, can you believe this jackass saying this stuff? And you can act like, you don't agree, and then see what they say. I don't care. Just share it. It helps. Next book club we have is June 12th. It's House of Leaves by Mark Danielowski. The host is Alex Maselli, who hosts our 451 Degrees podcast. So check that out. I have started to read the book. It's not a fast read. It's it requires work to read this book. So I would start now if you're interested in it. It looks really interesting and it seems kind of fascinating and trippy, but it's you don't just lounge around by the pool and knock it out in an afternoon. So get started if you want to join that. All right. Without further ado, let's bring on this week's media panel. We have our first guest is Dave Decamp. Dave is the news editor of antiwar.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Decamp Dave, DECAMPDAVE. Dave, welcome.
Hey, Carter. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And just remind everyone, antiwar.com, we've interviewed Scott Horton a few times. That's his anti-war website, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's one of the editorial directors. The real behind-the-scenes man who's been running it since it was founded in 1995 is Eric Garris. He co-founded it with Justin Raimondo, who is the big columnist for years and years, who passed away in 2019. But yeah, Eric, he's the one. He puts in a lot of work to run that site, and of course Scott does too.
I didn't know the background. I just thought of it as Scott's site generally, but that's good background info. Mm-hmm. And also let's welcome Adam B. Coleman. Adam is the author of Black Victim to Black Victor, which I can't reach, but it's on the shelf behind me, or I would reach and show you guys. He's an op-ed writer. He's a public speaker, host of A Good Faith Space, Twitter Spaces show, and the founder of Wrong Speak Publishing. You can follow him on Twitter at wrong_speak. Adam, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining. So, Dave, let's just start off the discussion with you. I'll just ask you, because we only have an hour with you, so we're going to try and cram everything in, all the Dave stuff we can in the first hour. What's the most important story about which the mainstream media has been misleading us in the past week or so?
Well, so I thought about that question a lot today, and it's kind of something that they've been misleading us about for the past few months. For about 2 months, we've been led to believe that Ukraine, had a chance of winning this war against Russia, and that narrative has fed into. I think is a big part of the reason why, Biden Congress passed this $40 billion aid bill for Ukraine. I mean, it's just an astronomical number. It's something we can't. I was just been so kind of shocked at how much money we're sending to Ukraine. It's $54 billion now, including all the new aid. And the reason why the public has gone along with this to some extent, now people are starting to wake up because it's so much money when we have so many problems here. But part of the reason why is because they're like, oh, Ukraine can win. Ukraine's winning. And the part of the reason, how they did this was because Russia, they withdrew from areas near Kiev in the north where they went in to focus in the east. So they called that a retreat. And they said, oh, Ukraine, it's been a brutal fight. A lot of people have died. It's tough to know exactly how many, Ukraine is exaggerating the Russian deaths and downplaying their own, and Russia's probably doing something similar. But we know thousands and thousands of troops on both sides have died, and it's a brutal, long, bloody war that we've seen so far. But in the east, in the eastern Donbass region, which is, borders Russia, in no world would any military analyst say that Russia can't win there. They've been slowly making gains, and the war's grinding on, and Russia is winning in this part of the war. And the media over the past week just started kind of admitting that. And there's all these articles now in the Washington Post, the New York Times, saying, how describing in pretty good detail how badly Ukraine's military is really hurting. They talked to some Ukrainian volunteers who just, volunteered to fight Russia right after they invaded, who were sent to the front lines with barely any training, barely any equipment. They're only eating a potato a day. So now we're getting this kind of what seems like the real narrative of what's happening on the ground. But, they're kind of spinning it as, we have to send them more weapons now. This is why we have to send them all these weapons, these long range rockets that Ukraine has been asking for a few months. So this was interesting today. This is kind of, you could see how the hawks in the government kind of use the media. On Friday, there was reports that the U.S. was going to send these long range rockets to Ukraine that can hit Russian territory, which would be a huge escalation. If Ukraine has the ability to actually launch attacks inside Russia with American weapons. But then today, Biden said he's not going to. But I mean, and who knows? We can't really take him for his word. But
he might not know what he's about to do.
Yeah, it's true. And they've changed. They keep kind of shifting the goalposts. At first, they were afraid to tell for Russia to know that we were sending Ukraine Stinger missiles. They're the portable anti-aircraft missiles that we gave the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the 80s, kind of infamously, and that all worked out great for everybody. But and they were afraid for Russia to know that we were sending them Stingers. This is when they first invaded, and now we're sending them howitzers, all this heavy artillery and stuff, and they like bragging about it. So it's just everything is changing. So Biden might still be hesitant to send those rockets, but who knows? I mean, things can change in a couple days.
Yeah. I mean, it is hard to tell because I read, so Scott Ritter wrote an article. I saw it today. I don't know when it came out. I think it might have come out today in Consortium News about Russia being at phase 3, and his contention was, and I actually don't know. I don't know whether this is true or not, but his contention was that Russia from the beginning has kind of said, look, we're going to go in and attack the infrastructure in Ukraine so that they can't be resisting, but we're really focused on Luhansk and Donetsk, which is that in the Donbass region. And these are two areas, just to remind people, they've been fighting Kiev for 8 years. They've been at war with Kiev because they want independence from Ukraine. So they asked to join Russia. Russia said no. But right before the Ukraine invasion, Putin said, okay, we recognize your independence. And according to Russia, again, it's hard to tell because you can't tell who's propaganda. It's propaganda on both sides. But according to Russia, it's like, okay, well, we went in, we did our thing with the rest of Ukraine, and now we're kind of focusing on the main goal, which was liberating Donbass. And, their contention was, Scott Ritter's contention was, all this military aid that the U.S. sent and other nations sent, and not just aid, intelligence. Like, we let the Ukrainians use our GPS and NATO's GPS and like give them intelligence. Like, we've been doing a lot of soft support for this. And the argument is that actually just prolonged the war and increased the number of deaths because it just, Russia didn't really have a plan to go. They weren't planning to go annihilate all Ukrainian civilians. That wasn't their plan, right? They were trying to dismantle the infrastructure and liberate Donbass. Again, I don't know how much of that's propaganda, but it's so hard to tell. But you do wonder, gee, what does $58 billion buy you in terms of dead bodies? Probably a lot.
Well, yeah. I mean, you have to think, so when they first invaded, they did say liberating the Donbass was always a goal, or, quote unquote, liberating, however you look at it.
Right.
But they also said they were going to denazify the country and demilitarize it. And, there are not, far right that word kind of has lost its meaning, I think. But you know, people, literal Nazis, in, you know, most infamously is Ukraine's the Azov battalion. They were a neo-Nazi militia that was integrated into Ukraine's National Guard. So there is a Nazi element in their military. Me personally, I'm not an expert on Ukraine's the inner politics. I don't know exactly how influential they are, but they're there. But so if that's their goal, denazification, that can be stretched to mean a lot of things. Same thing with demilitarization. Does that mean that he wants to go into Kiev and take out the government and completely dismantle the military and occupy it until, you know, for however long? It could, or it could just mean that they're going to destroy military infrastructure like they said they did. All those strikes, you know, that first phase of the war when they were going towards Kiev, you know, if you look at the Russian Ministry of Defense on Telegram, they're always putting updates. They destroyed this many Ukrainian tanks, let's say, all this infrastructure they're taking out. And then I think the biggest argument that they weren't trying to conquer Kiev is that they didn't really bomb it. There was no strategic bombing campaign, which is a term I don't really like, because that basically means obliterating a city, bombing civilian infrastructure, bombing supply lines, you know, what the U.S. did to many countries in the Middle East. And so they didn't do that. And that tells me, but again, I really don't know. It's tough to say. I think they kept their goals kind of vague in the beginning, but then after the first month, they made it clear that it's going to be focused on the East. And you said the longer the war goes on, the longer the U.S. keeps giving Ukraine support. You have Zelensky and the leaders in Kiev. They don't seem to care about the, you know, sending more and more bodies at this Russian war machine, as long as they're getting the support from the U.S. and NATO. When they're getting a ton of support, I mean, it's pretty unprecedented how much money and intelligence and training and all this stuff that's happening. It's really pretty unbelievable. But and we've seen Biden officials have said that this isn't about Ukraine winning the war or beating back Russia. It's about hurting Russia. Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, he said after that first phase of the war, he said, you know, we want to see a weakened Russia. That's one of their goals. So, and then the question is for the people of Ukraine, for people that care about Ukraine, is that if the Donbass, the Luhansk and Donetsk, and Crimea, who controls Crimea, which Russia has controlled since 2014, is who controls that worth all these bodies, all this death and violence? And that's what people have to think about, I think.
Yeah. Adam, have you been paying attention to Ukraine, and what are your thoughts based on what you see?
It's equally confusing. Like you said, you know, every time I try to focus on Ukraine, it's unfortunate because I try to look at people as not being like these pure evil monsters, right? So I try to look at Putin like he's a leader of a country, rather than, you know, he's just some monster who just likes bombing people for no apparent reason. So it's tough to do that and try to be logical about a guy who can't be in his position by being a complete moron or being completely monstrous, right? So he must be doing certain things for a particular reason. He must be invading for a particular reason. Whether we agree with those reasons or not, he's doing it for some reason. And I'm trying to figure out that reasoning base, right? And instead, the propaganda is he's just a monster and he's just bombing Ukraine because he's bombing Ukraine. When I look at it, it makes more sense that the more that the United States is getting involved with Ukraine, the more they're flirting with Ukraine joining NATO. Ukraine is on its border. And there's talks of, it was Finland and I forget the other country. Was it
Sweden?
What was it? Sweden?
Yeah.
Okay, I was thinking Sweden. So Finland and Sweden also joining NATO. You know, so, and also understanding that NATO was created in response to Russia or USSR. So I think that, yeah, I think if I was in Russia's shoes, I would be like, hey, this is a bit of an escalation. You know, imagine, I just think to myself, imagine if, I don't know, let's say China just started becoming buddies with Mexico and started building Chinese facilities all across the US-Mexican border. and saying they're going to have an alliance with China. Like, hold on a second, this is kind of concerning.
Yeah.
Why?
We might put some missiles here, but don't worry, they're not for you. They're just
right.
Just going to put them on the other side of the Rio Grande. Yeah.
Right. So from that strategic standpoint of all the different escalation points, and I'm aware of the conflict of resources and going down to Syria. Russian military was joining in there to fight against all that nonsense. In that proxy war. So I know that there's a battle for resources within mainland Europe, and once again, this seems more like a proxy war for resources, and the United States is in the middle of it. Well, all right, because it's a resource thing, I understand why we're in the middle of it. But the thing, if you didn't know that this was a resource thing, if you're just a apolitical person barely paying attention, why is the United States always involved in this type of stuff? What does the United States have to do with Ukraine? If Ukraine is of a high interest in mainland Europe, and you have an entire organization called the European Union that is there, wouldn't it be in the highest interest of the European Union to throw their backing behind Ukraine? Instead, it feels like we've taken the driver's seat in this entire conflict. We're the ones who are primarily funding the war against Russia through Ukraine. So this feels like an American operation, maybe with a little bit of backing from the British government, but it seems like mainland Europe, or the European Union, I should say, is nearly hands-off in this entire situation. Meanwhile, it seems to be going against their actual interests. Their actual interest is to have resources coming from Russia. They don't really want to blockade the very important resources coming from Russia. I think to myself, wouldn't it be in their best interest to try to advocate for peace? So maybe that's the reasoning why they're not funding the war, why they're not getting in the middle of it, because the world police of the United States is behind this and they're funding it, and it seems like an unstoppable train at this point.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, kind of the split, because like you said, a lot of EU countries, France, Germany, and Italy now, they've been calling for negotiations. Schultz in Germany, Macron in France, and Draghi, if I said that right, in Italy. They've all been speaking with Putin since he invaded. And since Russia invaded, Biden hasn't even, tried to speak with Putin. Blinken.
He implied that we should kill him, actually.
Pretty much. Yeah. And Blinken, who's supposed to be his top diplomat, he hasn't gotten on the phone with Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, since February 15th. I mean, how long ago is that now? If they actually cared about Ukraine, if they actually wanted to put an end to the fighting, they would be exhausting every avenue they could, diplomacy or whatever. But also in the EU, you have Poland and the Baltic states in the east. They've been pretty hawkish. Now, all EU countries, for the most part, have sent Ukraine some sort of weapons. But like you said, not as much as the U.S. and Britain. They're the real hawks in this. Boris Johnson, he visited Kiev and spoke with Zelensky in early April, and reports came out that said he told them, even if you're ready to sign a deal with Putin, we're not. The U.S., U.K., and most of NATO, maybe not most, but the leaders of NATO, the countries that matter. I mean, it's a U.S.-led alliance, so that's what really matters. But and like you said, that if you're European right now and you got rising gas bills and everything, they're working on a Russian oil ban, and that's going to just kill their economy. They're trying to do it phased out over a few years, but no matter how they do it, it's going to really hurt people, and especially after all climbing out of the COVID lockdowns and everything we've dealt with in the past few years, it's just so against Europe's interest to be going along with this. So hopefully these kind of cracks in NATO, in the EU, kind of lead us in a more peaceful direction, or a less hawkish direction. I think maybe there's some promise there. But again, if they ban, I think the big thing, if they ban oil, they ban Russian oil, and really if they ban Russian gas, that kind of tells me that we're not going back, that it's going to be like a new Iron Curtain in Europe.
Do you think that do you guys think that one of the underlying issues here is Vladimir Putin does not. I mean, for all of his faults. So let's just start with my assertion that both sides are bad in their own ways. I'm not trying to paint this as like a good guy, bad guy kind of thing. They're both horrible in their own ways. Okay, let's be done with that. Now, is it possible that they look at Putin as a man who is against the kind of WEF world? Like, I don't want to use like New World Order kind of things, but like there is this kind of wokish stakeholder capitalism. All of the Western countries are kind of moving in this pseudo wokish stakeholder capitalism way, and Putin is explicitly anti-woke. He's actually, and if you listen to what he says about U.S. culture, he sounds like he's farther right than Ted Cruz, and like saying like this is a problem. You guys are like, do you think they just recognize him as just like an ideological enemy, and so this is an excuse to prop this guy up as this evil villain, get rid of this ideological enemy, and maybe hopefully get someone in power in Russia that can be on their side?
Well, I definitely think regime change in Russia has been something that the neocons that run our foreign policy in the really in the Obama administration, after the coup in Ukraine in 2014, and Putin kind of humiliated them by taking Crimea, and then again the next year when he intervened in the Syrian war, and when he pretty much stopped Assad from getting overthrown. I think he really infuriated a lot of them. And I don't think it's so much about the ideological stuff, because if you talk about, the woke, the way I look at it is that they kind of apply that when it's convenient and they ignore it when it's not, especially if you look at like Saudi Arabia and stuff. And even Ukraine. I mean, they have the same. Ukraine is very similar to Russia in that sense. Gay marriage isn't legal there. That was always a big thing they went after Russia for, was gay rights. And Zelensky, he goes to the WEF and stuff, but I think he's just the convenient puppet for now, for them to prop up against Putin. And they would turn on him if he became inconvenient, if he started kind of going against them. And it goes deeper that Putin, I don't know exactly why they were so out to get him in the first place, but I know Hillary Clinton, 2012, the U.S. used to fund his opposition and meddle in Russian parliament elections. And I remember in about 2012, Hillary Clinton, spoke out in favor of protesters against Putin's party and stuff. And that was a big turning point, because before that, it was more about kind of a rapprochement with Russia, get relations back on track. You remember that Mitt Romney-Obama debate. Mitt Romney said Russia was, our biggest threat, and Obama laughed at him, who was running the Democratic candidate for president, laughed about Russia being a threat. And that wasn't that long ago. So it is kind of amazing how things changed in that sense.
It feels like Cold War inertia, except for there was this period post-Cold War where, like you said, Russia wasn't considered a threat. So it's hard to parse out. I mean, one thing I think that's difficult for me, at least, is just I've read a little bit about Russian culture and history with respect to some of this stuff, and it's hard to imagine. Like, first of all, they are really good. Someone in chat mentioned this. They're really good at propaganda. They're really good at just like saying whatever they know the other side, like whatever the West needs to hear. To like, they're really good at that. But they're also come from a culture of invasion. Like it's hard to as an American to imagine, but Moscow's been invaded over and over and over and over again in history from the West, and so they have a very protectionist policy, and they're very pro strongman. They very into like central authority, and there needs to be one strong person to protect Russia, and it's culturally very, very different. So sometimes it's just hard to parse out what's going on in the heads of not only Putin, but even his supporters in Russia. Because I don't think he's a dictator in the sense that no one likes him. Certainly there's part of the population that doesn't, and we'll never really know, because I don't think we have transparency there. But I don't think he's like massively unpopular. Do you?
I mean, I think he's very popular. I mean, you know, of course, people will question these numbers, but his approval rating before the invasion was about 60%. And after the invasion and the U.S. sanctions, it shot up to over 80%. And this was when Biden's went down to like, I forgot how low it went at one point, but it was pretty low. It was funny because the article I read about it, I think it was Newsweek. It was talking about how Putin's approval rating was so high. They said, oh, well, his approval rating in America is really low. Americans don't like him. Like that mattered. So it was just comparing Putin and Biden.
That's pretty stupid.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think, you know, and this goes to, we have, you know, history shows us we have decades of sanctions campaigns, economic pressure, and kind of proxy war. Whenever we do that to a country, you know, the people rally around the government because nobody wants a foreign, a foreign power to intervene in their country or try to imagine if Russia was trying to destroy our economy, if they had the power to do it. And we're bragging about it like Biden has been about, at first he bragged about how the ruble crashed, but that's shot back up. And, you know, I just think it's just such a foolish, short-sighted policy. Like, I just don't understand how they can't see that, how the sanctions and stuff isn't just going to make Putin kind of stronger domestically. And the war obviously gives him the power to crack down more. And they've been passing all these draconian laws to crack down on, you know, people that are against the war. So that's, you know, it's a shame because the Western pressure, like you talked about with Russia, they've always been invaded. And when you're messing around on their border, not just on their border, but in an area of the world that was historically Russian for a long time, Crimea and Eastern Ukraine. And, you know, over and over, they'll tell you it's a red line. It's a red line. I mean, the thing that, you know, you could say how bad, I mean, war is the worst thing. That's why I write for antiwar.com. That's why I do what I do. It's the worst thing that could happen, pretty much, I think. But, you know, this war, the lesson for us, for the Americans, for the West, really, is that it didn't have to happen. It could have been prevented a million times by just honest negotiation or just kind of letting Russia not have Ukraine, but have influence in Ukraine and just respecting Russia, which, you know, nobody in Washington wants to do, I guess.
Right. We could have called, if Putin really cared about NATO, we could have easily said, fine, we promise to never.
It could have at least tried. You know, like the negotiations leading up to the invasion, that was, they gave this big documents of what, you know, Russia's kind of security proposals and demands. And the main thing was promise us Ukraine won't ever join NATO. Right. And they didn't do it. And you think, okay, maybe it wouldn't have worked. But if you want to prevent a war, why not do it when they're not joining NATO anyway? Biden said it himself. He said they're not joining for at least 10 years or so.
So it could have been contingent, too. They're not going to join NATO unless you invade them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like then when we revoke that, like, okay, like it's, you know.
Yeah. Actually, can I, if you don't mind, I want to go back to before what you were saying, like Zelensky going to the WEF and stuff like that, and woke, you know, corporate wokeism and stuff like that. I think for people who are in power at that level, I don't really think they're that ideological. I think they are very matter of fact and business-like. They have their particular agenda. Like you said, if it works to use it, then they'll use it. You know, it's like saying we need to go to Afghanistan because we need to give women's studies there and give equal treatment to women. You know, it has nothing to do with the opium they have there. You know, right. So it's morality when it's convenient, because we know, you know, in our recent history, we're cool with strong men as long as they play ball with us. But as soon as they, you know, start doing their own thing, you know, look at Saddam Hussein. We had no problem with him for quite a while until he wanted to start doing his own thing and start playing ball. Then all of a sudden he was a terrible human being. We need to take him out. So we have a bunch of people who are like that throughout our history that we helped to set up, and we'll knock them down if they step out of line. So I don't think it's really ideological. I think it's just objective oriented. The objective is to obtain resources, keep profits going, and especially when it comes to oil and gas. It's to dominate the market. That's what Syria was ultimately about. That's why Russia intervened, because they were going to intrude on their cash cow of mainland Europe. And so they didn't want any of that. So I think all of this ultimately comes down to resources. Ideology is just convenience for them.
I mean, I think that makes sense to me on some level. When I think of the WEF and the Davos crowd and those elitists, I think of their ultimate objective is basically just power. You can say money as well, but like it's basically just power. Mm-hmm. And I view the ideology as their current strategy for obtaining power, right? So, like if you look at, for example, Klaus Schwab has he explicitly said, well, we tried with climate change and that didn't work, but COVID presents an opportunity, right? So okay, this is the new issue is like, now it's the opportunity to get what we want and to push for stakeholder capitalism and all this kind of stuff and the Great Reset. So, I guess when I don't know that they are, when I say Putin is pushing back, I don't know if it's necessarily like they have an ideological misalignment on that in that way, just that he sees their strategy and he's poking at their strategy that they're trying to, like, hey, we were going to take over using this strategy, and he's like, no, you're not. I'm going to poke people. I'm going to poke you at that strategy. I'm going to reveal that strategy and talk about it. And I don't think he has enough power to really make a big change, but it does earn him sympathy from people in the West who hear him talk about some of this ideology stuff that is being used. Granted, it's only being used for the purpose of obtaining power, but it is being used as a strategy, right?
Yeah, and there's a level of weaponizing empathy as well that happens, even from the Russian standpoint. Saying, oh, we feel threatened. Oh, that kind of thing.
Yes.
I mean, in some ways, it strategically makes sense to be pissed off that your adversaries are seemingly getting closer and closer to your borders. But at the same time, Russia does seem to be occasionally playing victim to the West, whenever it suits them. But I think just about everybody plays victim when it's necessary. It's interesting because there are times that we see countries as like these entities, and there's times that we see countries as almost like emotional lands, where they have emotions and we're supposed to bleed our hearts for the land itself. But other times it's just a place, So it's to me it's more of the propaganda and more of like the manipulation to get people to side one way or the other. Same thing I think what's happening in Ukraine. They've made this into a humanitarian situation, which in some ways it is. War ultimately turns into a humanitarian situation. But like you guys were saying, I think much of this is preventable, right? So they make our hearts bleed for the people who are caught in the crossfire of war by saying the only way to make this work out is we just give them billions of dollars more money so they can get their homeland back, right? And and so we fall for it. And the reality, like Dave was saying, it's looking like Ukraine's not going to be able to beat Russia. To be honest with you, I never thought Ukraine could withstand Russia unless we actively, or whether it's the United States or some other country, actively started fighting alongside Ukraine, not just providing arms. So I don't know.
Yeah. So Adam, go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to say about appealing to emotion. I mean, you really see like the propaganda campaigns turn up like that when Russia invaded. I mean, it was just all about appealing to emotion, and the media just prints everything that the Ukrainian government, every claim they make to make Russia look like the bad guy. And one thing that I thought was really interesting was that they presented this as like, no country's ever invaded another country since World War II. Putin's Hitler. The U.S. has never done anything like this. And then it was that. Did you see that George W. Bush's little slip up? I think
yes.
Last week. Yeah. So yeah, he said it's like, one man launched an unjustified, brutal invasion of Iraq. Ukraine, and he's like, in Iraq too. I think
the weird thing is he said in Iraq too.
Yeah.
I was like, wait a minute, did you just own that? I think he did.
I think he's got a guilty conscience, but and I was just like, I thought that's just such a revealing moment. It's like we try to, he had Condoleezza Rice on TV, who was in the Bush administration when they invaded Iraq, saying, "Oh, it's I forget exactly what she said. I think she called it a war crime, invading a country for no reason." And it's like, okay, so then what did you do in the Bush administration? So hopefully more people are starting to see that. I think there are a lot of cracks in the narrative, and it was pretty astonishing to see how many people went along with, Ukraine. Like, I have to support Ukraine. Okay,
right? Yeah, I have to change my emoji from a needle to a Ukrainian flag. I got it.
That's
cool. Yeah, but not the Yemeni flag. We don't talk about that.
No.
All right. So look, Adam. Let's ask you, what's the most important mainstream story that we've been misled by? It was poorly worded, but you know what I mean.
Actually, I lost it and it came right back to me. When Biden said that we would actively defend Taiwan, I thought that was very revealing and hilarious how they tried to walk it back, like he's just the senile patient who went off the talking points. But I think that's incredibly important that he did say that, and I think it's very. I would think strategically from a world standpoint, it makes him look weak, even if he misspoke. Let's say he misspoke. It makes him look weak, and it shows his position as not actually going to intervene when it comes to Taiwan. And so it's like unnecessarily showing his hand, because he answered that question in a particular way, and then he walked it back. And so I've been saying, if China invades Taiwan, we're not doing shit about it, to be honest with you.
Right.
I think we've allowed China to grow to the size that they are by providing all these resources for them. We've allowed them to steal our intellectual property. We've voluntarily given our intellectual property to them by allowing them to build our stuff. And, they just have our blueprints to all different types of incredibly important parts of our economy. We can look at medical necessities. They produce it. We can look at all different types of stuff. If China was to cut us off, we would be stuck for quite a while. We would be screwed. And so I think that they know that. I think that China knows that. I'm well aware that the government understands that. But even more so, I think members of our government actually like the position that we're in. They like the Chinese money. And so I don't understand the interest of intervening with China, because they've been personally making money off of China. They've been subservient to China. So they're used to being in that position. I think for many within the federal government, they don't really care about American interests. They've kind of been about what's their particular interest. If this was about American interests, we'd be doing something completely different. We wouldn't be so subservient to China. I'm not one to be like, we need to be 100% isolationists and we have to produce everything here. But my God, I can't remember. I remember during COVID, they were saying like China produces like 50% of our medical supplies or something to that nature. Mm-hmm. And I'm just thinking like, that's not good. Like if they cut us off, we're fucked. And I don't think any country should be in that position where they have to be so reliant on a semi-adversarial country like China is. So that's the.
Let me play devil's advocate though. If that semi-reliance prevents war between the two countries, maybe that's a good mutual dependency to have.
That's how I feel about China, because there's a lot of hawks, right now. So we're talking about Russia. It's all about Russia in the news right now. But for the Biden administration, for the Pentagon, for a lot of the agencies, FBI, CIA, they're all saying that China is the top priority. And what you said about Congress making a lot of money off China, which is very true, and they have been for years. There's also a big shift that's happened, I think, in the past really year, 2 years, 3 years, kind of halfway through the Trump administration. One thing that was pretty revealing was that earlier this year, Congress voted unanimously, except for Thomas Massie in Kentucky, the only honest person in Congress right now, I think, maybe Rand Paul, but he voted against it. And it was a bill banning all imports from Xinjiang, from China's Xinjiang province. So you can't source materials from there anymore. And this was lobbied against by Nike, Coca-Cola, all these huge American corporations that are lining the pockets of Congress, really lobbied against it, but they all voted for it except for Massie, because he has a pretty principled view of what the government should say about who we trade with, So yeah, I think our relationship with China, we probably shouldn't be so interdependent. I think we should definitely diversify our supply lines. But
yes.
With there's also been a slow U.S. military buildup in the South China Sea that started really under Obama. Slowly, Trump ramped it up, and Biden's ramping it up even more, which a lot of people don't really know about. The amount of aircraft carriers and ships we're sending into the South China Sea, into the Taiwan Strait, and we probably, when it comes to Taiwan, I mean, I think that if the U.S. starts to say that they'll defend Taiwan and starts to support them more, I think we'll see a similar situation like Ukraine. I think it's not going to be soon because of the economic stuff, but I think maybe a decade from now, it'll make more likely. And Chinese officials are saying this now. They've kind of changed their tune. They used to, there's always the hawks in the media that they want us to see, but their diplomats, ambassadors and stuff. Just in the past few years, as we've been supporting Taiwan more, kind of these kind of unprecedented like visits that might not seem that significant, like they send high-level U.S. officials to Taiwan now that they didn't since 1979 when they broke diplomatic relations. So we're seeing all that, and that stuff that really pisses China off. I think more than the U.S. warships sailing around there. So it's really sensitive. It's their red line, and I think, I understand there's a lot of sentiment. A lot of people don't like China in America, but you really have to weigh, what is it worth risking the world to kind of go down this path with China, because they don't have as many nukes as Russia, but a war between the U.S. and China could end humanity as we know it. And I think we just have to people have to keep that in mind.
No, I completely understand that. I think for me, it's not even necessarily about yes, we have to defend Taiwan or not. For me, it's always about the threat. Right. And so I could perfectly see China saying, the U.S. is playing games right now. So it seems like war is inevitable. So we're going to do whatever we have to do resource wise, military wise, to build ourselves up for the next 5 to 10 years for that moment when it comes and we have to cut off ties with the United States, because China is relying on us to some degree as well. So it's not just one-sided. I could completely see that happening. The unfortunate thing about a regime like China, where it's very top heavy, is that they don't really care about the after effects for the people within it, right? It's just a means to an end. As long as the state survives, that's all they really care about. So if in pursuit of domination, 1 million people die, then 1 million people die. It's a country of 1 billion, right? That's the perspective that I get, that they're kind of callous in that way. Maybe not completely callous, like Mao or something like that. But I could see them if it came down to it, if they felt that this is the moment to respond, and it means sacrificing some of their citizens, not necessarily because they're involved in a war, but because the war resulted in embargoes or something of that nature, where resources are cut off and people starve. You see what's going on in is it Shanghai?
The
where people are being,
the lockdowns. Yeah, I think Shanghai.
And how kind of cold and callous they are in that situation. Imagine if there was an embargo, there were supplies actually being cut off, and it resulted in 1 million people dying because of it. As long as the state is in power and the state is relatively in control, I think they wouldn't really care.
Yeah, I mean, well, the U.S. Knows a lot about embargoes and blockading countries and killing people that way.
Yeah.
But I would say with China and Taiwan, it's good to keep in mind that their economies are very intertwined too. I mean, there's massive amounts of trade. I don't have the figures off the top of my head between Taiwan and mainland China, and also travel. I mean, millions of people travel back and forth each year. So right now, it's not in China's interest. If you think about them, even in that way, as a state that cares about the survival of the state. A hot war in Taiwan it would be a disaster. For them to invade Taiwan, it would be one of the biggest. It would be the biggest amphibious invasion in modern military history. I mean, it would make the invasion of D-Day look like nothing. It would be like 10 times bigger than that. So they don't want to do that. But again, it's a red line. And if they think that's the way everything's going, and right now, from their view, I think they do, because you see, the U.S. is signing all these new military alliances in the region. They just signed that deal with Australia. They're going to get nuclear-powered submarines. And where are those nuclear-powered submarines? Where are they meant to go? They're meant to go near China's coast. They're meant to go in the Taiwan Strait. And they are also the Quad, which is India, Japan, Australia, and the U.S. Biden's really boosting them. That was the thing Trump kind of revived. It's like an informal alliance, but the hawks in Washington, they want it to be an Asian NATO. And they're drawing a lot of comparisons. I kind of get annoyed at all the parallels between Ukraine and Taiwan. They're saying, oh, Putin invaded Ukraine, China's going to go into Taiwan next. But, because it is so different, because it's an amphibious invasion and all that. But, I do think that there are parallels with NATO expansion and just this, this kind of encirclement of these countries. You're going to get a reaction.
I want to throw a couple things out about China. I view Taiwan as, the story in the Bible where two women come to King Solomon and they have a baby, and they're both claiming they own the baby. And King Solomon says, well, why don't you just cut it in half? And you can each take half. And the real mother is like, no, you can have it, right? That's how he figures out who the real mother is. I view Taiwan like a war in Taiwan is cutting the baby in half. 90%, something like 90% of most chips for the world are made in Taiwan. As you mentioned, Dave, they've got a rich trading relationship with China. They also have a rich trading relationship with the West. You can't blow up the world's only foundry. Basically, you can't it's not the only foundry, but you can't do that and not. It's like cutting off your nose to spite your face. It's not going to help China to get in a hot war with Taiwan. It will massively hurt them. But the other thing I want to just let people should understand that Xi Jinping is not doing well right now. When you look at the Shanghai lockdown, the other members of the CCP are really angry at him. He may not last the year as the chairman, because he has adopted this pig-headed zero COVID policy. And China's not a democratic country, but they're kind of like technocrats in the sense that they're managing a tax farm. They don't care about individual rights or anything, but they're managing a tax farm, and mismanagement of Shanghai hurts the tax revenue and hurts the tax farm and hurts the animals. And they don't like that. So they're not happy with what Xi Jinping's doing. The other thing you have to wonder about with China is they have a dearth of young men. They have an excess of young men, not a dearth. They have too many men, partly because of the one child policy. People would kill the fetus if it was a female. So they actually do have. So I'm just throwing out all these factors. They do have men that are kind of expendable, right? Hey, sure. if we had to go kill 100 or a million Chinese men, maybe that's okay. But also they have roughly $1 trillion of the Treasury debt, right? They're one of the largest debt holders. So it's weird. I agree with Adam when he's we give them our intellectual property and blah, blah, blah. And they've been taking intellectual property in a way that we seem to be willing to look the other way and not do. The flip side is all we've been giving them is IOUs, which are basically worthless. And they're the ones, they're one of the few countries propping up the dollar by buying our stupid treasury debt. And the moment, like if China, and not that they're friends with Japan, but like those are the two largest foreign debt holders. If they get together and say like, you know what, screw this, we're going to dump the dollar. Or if as Xi Jinping's made more moves towards Putin, if they're like, screw it, we're going to abandon the petrodollar, that costs us a lot. That's we're not going to bother invading Taiwan. I mean, they could destroy our economy without a hot war, I guess is my point. If they really want to do something to us, I think they can. And it used to be true, that the Chinese were copycats. They would take our intellectual property and go copy it and produce things. That's not totally true anymore. Their economy has grown. They have a thriving middle class. They have many, many educated. They probably have more educated engineers than the rest of the world combined. I'm not sure about that exactly, but just a slew of engineers, and they are starting to invent their own things and have their own ecosystem. And yeah, it was true when they were transitioning from third world country to where they are now. They basically, the best they could do is copy shit and make it cheaply, but that's not really true anymore. So I think China is kind of emerging on the world stage as a different country than we've thought about it in the past. And I'm partly scared about what they will do. But I'm also scared that their biggest export is ideology. I think a lot of we talked to the WF earlier on. I think a lot of these globalist elites look at what China does from a management of the tax farm and say, that's great. These people have constant surveillance. They have basically no rights, but they're producing and the government's taxing them. And look, there's this little committee that's in charge of the whole country. I love this model. How do we get that going on in Europe? I mean, I'm pretty sure that's the mindset. I don't know. That was just a long diatribe, but
yeah. Well, I think what you said about how China has a big middle class and how they're producing a lot now. I think that's a big part of the reason why we're seeing the shift, why the American corporations and the people in Congress are shifting away from supporting China completely, is because they're really starting to compete now with their, technological prowess and stuff. And we're seeing, a lot of, American corporations, I think, are threatened. And even to get on the intellectual property thing, I think that's all kind of blown out of proportion. Because from, how I understand it, intellectual property, trade secrets, it's generally something that you protect because you assume it's going to be stolen. And I think that if you're a corporation and you're doing business in China, or you're inviting a Chinese company to do business in America, I think that's your risk. And I think David Stockman put it like Trump's policies of the tariff war is basically turning the U.S. government into a patent lawyer for these corporations. And, because it's just one of the major talking points about why China is such a threat. I just don't think that they are. And I think that we could just kind of get along with them. And there's definitely things that they do to influence our culture that, we could push against and stuff. But I just don't think that we have to go down this path with China. And I know it's not a really popular view these days.
Well, I think we could have easily had some kind of reciprocity, but I think you're right. The companies put themselves, I think when they're complaining about it, what happens is they get a business opportunity and it's like, well, you're going to lose. We know you're going to lose your intellectual property, but do you want to make the money? And they they do that and then complain that they lost their intellectual property. It's like, well, you kind of knew when you said, yes, I would like Shenzhen to manufacture my widget. You kind of knew that your widget technology was going to be now in China's hands, right? I mean,
I've heard stories. I forget, somebody I knew that lived in China for a little while. He had a friend that moved there and he had a business. I forget exactly what it was. It was some kind of food truck thing, and he made something really good. And then slowly, there was another food truck. Basically, the government basically took his idea and then made his operation, not legal. And then he just went back to America. That's not right.
That's the story of Uber, kind of.
Yeah.
Right.
That's true. Yeah, it's a story of a lot of things. And that's a risk. And it's not right, but it's not one thing that we shouldn't do, a trap that we shouldn't fall into, is for our government is to become more protectionist and more like the Chinese government. I think that's another kind of Trump thing that we risk falling into when you wanted to ban TikTok and all that.
Yes.
That was a whole saga, but I guess that didn't happen. And WeChat, that would have been pretty big if he did that. So
I'm gonna say this out loud because you brought up WeChat, and I haven't said it in a while, so I want to tell people: if you are trying to protect your communication from the U.S. government, WeChat is an excellent tool because China will see everything you're doing, but they definitely don't want the U.S. government to see what's going on in WeChat. So you need to leverage one superpower against the other. If your threat is the Chinese government, don't use WeChat. But if it's the U.S. government, WeChat's a fine app to be used.
That was always my point too about TikTok and the Huawei phones. That they're like, they're filled with Chinese spyware. I'm like, well, my phone's filled with American spyware, and I don't live in China, so I'd rather have the Chinese.
I'd rather have China spying on me because they don't give a crap what I do.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's just what I think about China, but I think my opinion and the way things are going, like right now, the most exciting political movement, I think, is like the populist right, kind of the America First guys, because they're great on Russia, Ukraine, they're great on the Middle East wars now, but they're all pretty hawkish on China. And I just don't see it kind of getting any better because on the other side, there's still definitely the ones that have their interests in making lots of money from China, but you're starting to see kind of the same view from pretty moderate Democrats. There's this one lady, Elaine Luria, she's a House representative in Virginia, and she wants to give Biden war powers for Taiwan. She just wants him to be able to go to war with China if they ever invade Taiwan. She's a Democrat, and that's terrifying to me. So.
Yes. Especially, anyone have that power, Biden especially. I know you've got to go, Dave, but before you run, I was shocked this weekend by one thing that happened. I had promised some friends of mine. I'm a guy who was involved in the Libertarian Party like a long time ago, just a little bit. I voted for Wyoming in the Free State Project a long time ago, and they voted for New Hampshire, so I didn't move or whatever.
Yeah.
And I've been super disappointed in the Libertarian Party. I mean, they've been putting people out like Joe Jorgensen. The Harry Browns have died off and whatever. They've been crap for a long time. And I said to my friend, if the Mises Caucus takes over, I will re-engage with the Libertarian Party. They did. The Mises Caucus took over this weekend. I had no idea they were that close to taking over. Yeah. So I'm going to have to be a libertarian now.
Yeah, I just joined today because it was kind of the same thing. I didn't think that they would be able to do it like this quick. And I texted Scott Horton, who's very involved in that. And I said, now that you guys did all the hard work, I guess I'll join. Yeah,
that's I'm going to ride their coattails.
Yeah, I was never involved. I've never really been involved in any political party, but it was exciting to see. I watched some of the speeches. I mean, Dave Smith is awesome, I think. And Ron Paul was there, and like, it just looked like really cool and exciting. So I figured, I'll check it out now. But what can it, and we'll see what it can do, because that's another thing. I don't think the Libertarian Party, like, what could they really do in this country? But they got
if they get Dave Smith on stage with two other presidential candidates, that is a win.
And the point that I think his name is Michael Heiss, he's the head of the Mises Caucus, that he made, which was a great point, is that, Dave Smith's never going to get any kind of mainstream approval like Joe Jorgensen did. I guess I don't even know if they acknowledged her really, but she would be able to get on CNN and stuff, I bet. Same thing with Gary Johnson. Dave Smith, there's, if you ever watch his like comedy podcast, there's plenty of clips they could pull from there. But Heiss said, he's a regular guest on Joe Rogan. It's like, that's bigger than any of these shows. They have that whole media sphere. They can dominate that. And I think that's pretty significant. So it'll be exciting. So hopefully, I think the thing now is that the people that want to see Dave Smith, I guess I don't know how any of this stuff works, but I should ask them, is to get him nominated is kind of like the next big thing they have to do.
Yeah, I guess.
I
don't know how it works either. I do despise politics. Someone in chat just said, thanks for completely negating my whole conversation with you on Dangerous Thoughts last week. I had a whole conversation where I was like, I'm not focused on politics. I'm still not focused on politics. I'm still focused on philosophy and culture. And
I've never
and
been
psychology
involved in politics, but anyway, I got to run, and you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. How can people follow you?
Before you
leave?
Just on Twitter at Decamp Dave, and then if you want to read, I write news articles every day for antiwar.com, just about every day. So check that out. You can sign up to our mailing list, and we send it out every day. You'll get some news. So yeah, and Adam Carter, it was good to meet you guys.
Good to meet you, man.
Thanks
for coming.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks.
Take care. All right, Adam, you're on the hot seat now. I'm going to ask you, what news story should we be paying attention to that isn't being noticed? Or what do you want to talk? There's one other thing I do definitely want to talk to you about, but I'll ask you that question first. Is there a news story you think we should be paying attention to that we're not?
Well, that was the gaffe from Joe Biden. I thought that was
that was that one. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, a story that they talked about. It seemed like for a day, and they just moved on from it. But I thought that was kind of significant.
Well, there's definitely another story I want to talk to you about, and that is the Uvalde shooting, because you wrote an article about fatherlessness. Maybe can you just walk us through what your thoughts on that whole thing is, and maybe we'll get into a little discussion about it.
Sure. So, the article obviously is somewhat inspired because of what happened in Uvalde, but I wanted to talk about just in general the actions of mass shooters. One of the really important points that I wanted to talk about is that for mass shooters, in my belief, they're more suicidal than homicidal, and to get to that point of being suicidal is a point of hopelessness. It's a detrimental way of seeing your life as being valueless, right? Because like we were talking about earlier, he was in a shootout with the police for 12 minutes outside the school. He no longer cared whether he lived or died, right? That's completely reckless behavior. Someone who is emotionally settled, happy, filled with life, hopeful, doesn't get into shootouts with cops, right? The people with purpose, people with who believe in themselves with confidence, and the list goes on. They don't engage in reckless behavior. They don't engage like their life doesn't matter. And so what you see, whether it's mass shootings like this or gang shootings and gang violence, where they know that they're going against adversaries who also shoot back, and they don't care if they die. And death is familiar around them, where people are dying at young ages, and they know the behavior that they're engaged in is dangerous, yet they still don't care. This is a suicidal mindset. I kind of talk about it a little bit, or at least articulate it a little bit in my book. But the idea of engaging in this way is detrimental to anybody. It is a hopeless way of living your life, constantly putting your life at risk, doing dangerous behavior with no real reward at the end of it. It's very different than, let's say, joining the military and getting involved in a war that you believe is just, right? Men are willing to put their lives at risk to fight in a conflict that they believe will help people, that will save a country, or to take down evil. They're willing to risk their lives for these particular things. That's not suicidal, right? That's something completely different. So before someone makes that equation, I just wanted to clarify. So the reason I bring up fatherlessness in this particular scenario, for one, he didn't live with his father. And two, because of, I think, his mother's health situation, or at least that was the excuse, his mother's health situation, he had no contact with his father, so basically for at least 2 years. And by accounts, that was extremely detrimental to his mental health, being isolated, being locked down, and not having any contact with his father, which, I don't know, from the sounds of it, sounds like even his relationship with his father was hit and miss. So I wanted to talk about the impacts of fathers and not having that father figure, and what the role of a father is supposed to be. Because if more fathers are involved in their child's lives and points them in a particular direction and gives them hope and reassures them, helps build their confidence, like no kid who feels that particular way would dare risk their life or think about killing themselves or be suicidal because of something like that. We all have bad days and there might be bad moments, no matter how you can have the greatest father in the world, you have those things. But carrying out with it is a completely different story. Engaging in completely reckless behavior, that's not a momentary depression kind of thing. That's usually something that's been going on for quite a while, of you contemplating it and you coming to that realization that you no longer care. So I think it's incredibly important to talk about the role of fathers and how it impacts kids. And while I'm not saying statistically, mass shooters usually come from broken homes. They usually come from homes where they're disconnected from their fathers. And much in the same way, suicide bombers are the same people in other countries. So this is not even an American, this is a human thing. There's an incredible importance, especially for men who are looking for influence, who are looking for purpose, and guidance coming from their parental figure, coming from their father figure. And you can fill in the gaps, some people have stepfathers and so on and so forth. But most of the time, that parental figure is someone to help guide their kids in life, and missing it leaves them lost.
Now, isn't there a difference though between being suicidal and, like, we've all been depressed, and maybe even many people have thoughts of suicide sometimes in their lives, and I actually think that's quite normal to contemplate it. It's not normal to do it, but there's something very different from that, and I'm going to go kill fourth graders on my way out, right? That's there's something else.
Well,
right.
That's the second part to it. So there is the suicidal aspect to it, but the other part is, how I interpret it is invisibility, right? I don't know about necessarily this one. I don't know too much about the backstory, but was he getting into a firefight and he just happened to end up at the school, or was his intentions to go to the school in the first place?
I think the problem with this one, from what I can tell so far, is that we don't know much about his motivation, but we do know he was intending to do something, because he did. Okay. I don't know if he was intending to do a school shooting, but he was intending to be in some sort of blue suicide, right? Like he did text someone about his guns and said something's going to happen. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know what it seems like he was intending for this. I mean, even if you get in a firefight because you want to, let's say you're mad at cops for some reason and you want to go kill yourself in a blue suicide and shoot at cops, it seems like a weird decision in the middle of it to decide, I guess I'll just go into the school next door and kill a bunch of innocent kids first. Like, that seems, it seems intentional. Like it's not like a whimsical decision, right?
Yeah. I was just trying to think, like, you're right. That sounds kind of illogical. I was just thinking, like, if he was on his way somewhere else and it just turned into him getting into a firefight and he ended up outside the school. But let's just say for this situation, that was his intention in the first place, was to go there. Or even if it was because it sounds like he wanted to hurt other people, no matter where it was going to be. So I think that is the intent. Excuse me, I can't even speak. Attention aspect of it, especially if you feel invisible, right? So I kind of think about the Columbine shootings, right? From what I remember they wanted to make a big spectacle of it. They wanted to make it a show. It almost is what it kind of felt like. And they were, from reports, they were bullied. They were made to feel less than. They were made to feel invisible. And the way I interpret it is that they wanted this to be the moment where they were finally heard and they were finally seen. And so they were doing something in a most outlandish way that will finally get people's attention. So that's kind of how I interpret it from like
let me just
standpoint.
pause for a second, because I'm processing this as you're saying it. But so if I think of I think Adam Lanza was was that the Sandy Hook dude? Which one was I don't remember.
That was Sandy Hook.
Oh, I'm thinking of the Columbine. Anyway, the Columbine shooters seem to me to be they're shooting their peers, right? So if they're bullied and angry and just kind of like suicidal, but also just angry at their peers, like you can imagine them feeling ostracized by their peer group and bullied or whatever. Their peer group is not a moral target, but it's a target that you understand. I'm like, okay, I understand that's the target. They're going to go shoot the kids that bullied them or whatever, right? In general, and they're kind of lumping the kids in. Right. But when you look at like Sandy Hook, or when you look at Uvalde, this is killing kids who have no relation to you. First of all, they're much smaller. They're not your peers. And it's almost like there's almost something sadistic about it, because they're like almost definitionally innocent people. Like there's no, the younger you get, the more just definitionally innocent you are, right? Like, if you go kill a 50-year-old, you could imagine, well, maybe he did some bad things and I'm going to rationalize it because blah, 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 right? It's still bad.
Yeah.
You kill a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old, it's like there's that kid's the kid is, that you're doing, that it's innocent. You can't justify it. I don't know. It seems like there's some sort of sadism at work here in addition. Like, I don't know if this kid tortured animals or anything, or if there's any sadistic past. I know we've seen that in the past I think the Parkland shooter had a history of that. Mm-hmm. I don't know. So it does seem like something more than suicide, and even more than just anger at peers. There's a level of horrific sadism that I can't connect with even intellectually.
That's why I kind of use the word show. Like you said, there's no connection, unless there's a connection that we're not aware of, to the school, like something happened with him. Maybe he attended the school. I don't know. But there's no connection other than that. Those kids didn't do anything to him. And that's why I kind of feel like it's much of a show to cause an overwhelming reaction to people, because you're killing the most innocent in our society. I kind of feel like it's much in the same way, like if a suicide bomber was to, let's say, go into, I'm trying to think of like a good equivalent.
I guess that's the thing, because even suicide bombers, like this is a level of nihilism and misanthropy, like exponentially concentrated, that like I don't even see in a suicide bomber, because at least even if you take like the people, let's just take the worst that we can think of, the 9/11 hijackers.
Right.
They had a positive cause. I mean, I disagree with it, and it was evil, but at least they were like, well, we need to attack America because they were doing bad things, and I'm going to end up in heaven, with Allah. And so like it's demented and evil, but there's a goal. And when I see this kind of thing, it's like, there's not even a goal other than pure destruction. There's nothing to be gained ideologically from it. It's just misanthropy and nihilism, right?
Yeah. So let me just clarify. When I was bringing up suicide bomber, I meant from the aspect of attacking normality, right? So like, say for example, the 9/11. After they did that, what did we do? We reshaped everything about our air transportation system, created a new bureau, part of the federal government, for security. So we did all of these things because they wanted to pierce at the heart of our innocence when it comes to something as mundane as getting on a plane and just going to another city, right? And now we changed everything about ourselves, right? So it's to pierce at something that seems so normal, like a little kid just going to school one day, who is so innocent and doing nothing to hurt nobody, to really drive the fear into whether, I don't know if he could assume that this become a national story or not. Maybe so, but like to drive at the hearts of the people that are in his neighborhood, that's in his community, to not be forgotten. And maybe I don't think any of this stuff is simple, right? So even when I talk about fatherlessness, I don't think that's the only thing. I think there's a whole bunch of things, different things that are going on. And yeah, he may come to the point where, you know, he's being sadistic, suicidal, you know, you name it, all encompassed into one thing, and just ultimately no longer cares. And maybe even just hates people in general, sees people as disappointments, and hates innocent, thinks there's no such thing as innocence because he had no innocence when he was a kid. Who knows what may have happened to him? I don't know his entire backstory.
Yeah.
But I think there are some aspects of piercing the heart of the American public, or even if it never became a national story, just his local community, as some sort of revenge for being invisible. Who knows? It could be a bunch of different underlying things.
Yeah. The reason that I wish we would talk about this a lot more, and the reason is, you know, when you see the news now, everyone's talking about gun control, right? And
yeah,
and they're all, you know, you hear the way they talk. They say things like, well, now that you can have so many rounds, now that you can have these kind of weapons, we have to blah 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 blah. It's framing it as if the gun control laws like used to be around and aren't anymore, or these weapons, like the AR-15 was invented in the 50s. This is not a new weapon. Like people could carry hundreds and hundreds of rounds in the past. Like there's nothing new technologically here, and there's nothing new legally. There's no new, like, you know, I get there was a assault weapons ban briefly, which expired, but like before that and after that, like there's nothing new here legally, and yet the entire discussion is around the guns and the law as if this is new stuff, when what is new has to be something else. Like it's got to be something else that changed, because the technology and the laws haven't really changed for a really, really, really long time.
Exactly. That was ultimately the point I was trying to make. Like, access to guns, for example, hasn't really changed. The laws haven't really changed, yet it seems to be increasing. It seems to be happening more so. These particular events, and I would eventually even say things that are gang-oriented, where they're mass shootings. You know, 3, 5, 7 people shot, 3 people die from it. You know, from an event, that's a mass shooting. When you go and shoot up an entire area, and you know that's a mass shooting. You know, we just don't like to call it that for very political reasons. But I think that I almost feel like gun control, or the topic of guns, is like this imaginary wedge issue that will never go away. Just like how abortion is to some degree, right? For example, the Democrats have been in power for, you know, for example, they've had, you know, the branches of government to pass whatever they want before, when Obama first went into office, right? If they wanted to codify abortion into law for the land, they could have done it, right? If it was that important to them. But they didn't, right? Because it's something to campaign on. It's something to keep around. It's an issue that they have no real intentions of finding a solution for, just saying that here's my position, right? There's no real interest behind it for them to do so. I kind of feel like it's the same thing when it comes to guns and gun control. You know, a lot of different topics when it comes to the federal government, you can say, oh, well, both parties feel the same way about it. And then the next step is look at the money. And the other day I was like, let me actually look at the gun lobby, who they fund. And I'm surprised. 0 Democrats. Like, it was just all Republicans. And so I'm like, this is one of the very few things where it's just down one particular line that they've picked their side and they're supporting one particular side and the other side is choosing not to. It's this issue that will never go away. There won't be really any leeway. And we have the Constitution also behind it that is a hurdle for there to be some sort of huge change in guns. So I kind of feel like it's this thing that we bring up when something unfortunate happens like this, and then give it a week or two, we stop talking about it, we move on to the next news cycle. Same thing with abortion. You know, when the debate over Roe v. Wade, when that came up, people were like, this will be the thing that, you know, independents who are going to vote Republican are going to go back to Democrats. I'm like, in 3 weeks, no one would care anymore. Why? Because they're not trying to get an abortion right now. Like, people care that their gas is, you know, through the roof, it's record highs, and that they're not getting an increase in pay because the economy is struggling. So, yeah, they have more important things in this imaginary abortion that they think women should have the right to choose from. So, you know, I kind of feel like it's the same thing when it comes to gun control. We can say all these different things. Even after Sandy Hook, we can say all these different things and create all these lobbying groups. And David Hogg can go on Twitter and complain that no one should have the right to shoot a bullet ever. But nothing will ultimately come from it. I think that it's just much of just fodder.
Well, I mean, I partly kind of hope so. If what's going to come from it is gun laws,
Me too.
But you know, like it's fascinating because even, you know, you have people who feign depth, right? They're like, oh, we're going to really roll our sleeves and get up into this serious issue and figure out what's going on. And the stuff they talk about is gun control laws, universal background checks, red flag laws, none of which would have helped in either of the two cases in the last 2 weeks. 0. Like, okay, so what the hell are you talking? I guess the gun control laws, you could argue could if you banned the guns outright. But like, they talk about stuff that either wouldn't help at all, or that's just outright like, oh, well, we need to ban guns. It's like, okay, well, I understand that discussing broken homes and mental health issues and fatherlessness and the increased addiction, or I'll say just delivery of SSRIs to young men, the real vilification of masculinity generally, that's happened. Like, I get that all this is really messy, and maybe the answer's not really obvious, but I spent actually part of the weekend reaching out to people who are psychologists who study this stuff, and no one wants to talk. They're like, well, I don't know. We need more gun laws. It's like, this is your job. You don't even want to do this. This is your fucking job. This is what you study. And they're like, well, yeah, but I can't have a conversation if we can't talk about gun laws. It's like, all right, well, like, fine, but no one's looking at this, right? No, seriously looking at it. Like you said, in 2 weeks, it'll move on and we'll be talking about something else. And, you know, and meanwhile, like, you know, I'm glad you brought up just gun violence in general, because mass shootings are a very small percentage of gun violence. I think here I'm going to go over to, I'll just look it up. HeyJackass.com. If anyone ever wants to keep track of Chicago, you can go to HeyJackass.com. Let's see. Memorial Day weekend. So far, 6 people have been killed and 37 wounded in Chicago over Memorial Day weekend. To date in May, 50 people have been shot and killed. 280 have been shot and wounded. And the year to date in Chicago is 220 shot and killed. I mean, that's one city.
And you know what's even funnier about that? I don't know if you even saw this, but John Legend thought he was being this very intelligent guy by saying, well, people want to talk about Chicago, because I believe he's from Chicago. People want to talk about Chicago. Well, here are the most violent states, and in showing the red states as that have the highest, like, I forgot the exact, like, shooting deaths or something like that. But We're talking about a city, not a state, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
It's
the rest of
it's
Illinois
really
isn't like
deceptive.
this, I don't think. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And also, what he doesn't account for is suicides within. So they just talk about gun violence, but
Right.
suicide is a huge factor when we talk about these particular things. The reason we don't talk about it is because it disproportionately affects men. Right? Men are the ones who are killing themselves. Right? If women were committing suicide at a high rate, we'd be talking about this. We'd be talking about the mental health of women.
If you would do it nonstop, it would be, there would be constant pearl clutching on the View, and
right, right.
And you know, I as much as I don't understand the underlying causes here, and I don't think anyone does, I will venture to say it's likely true that the rise in male suicides is correlated to the rise in mass shootings, and because they have a common factor. Like, my guess is there's a common mental health factor. There's a common factor leading men to kill themselves and leading the most unstable or nihilistic or misanthropic ones to do horrific mass killings.
Right. You know, and so there's two things I actually want to bring up. Part of the problem is that we think every solution has to come from the government. This is why we don't talk about these things. The government can't legislate your father being at home with you. They can't legislate it, right? But what they can do is, you know, send them to court and make them pay and doing all this different stuff, right? And reduce the value of a father. But they can't make your father be there. They can't make your father care about you, right? So, yeah, there are very complicated things that are culturally based, right? There is a Western culture. I've heard this from people in Canada and in the UK. So that's why I say Western, but let's just say American. There's an American cultural aspect where we are degrading family, we're degrading marriage and its importance, and the importance of nuclear family. We're uplifting the single parent household, and we're wondering why boys are feeling like life doesn't matter. They feel purposeless. All the time we talk about men aren't catching up to the women, right? As if we're just inherently born deficient recently. It's like, no, there are certain situations that are happening. You know, I talk about single parenthood, and when we do, we usually talk about in the black community because it's at like around 70% rate, right? But with, what was it, 13% of the population. White Americans are, I believe, last check, like around 60% of the population. And so, or maybe it's a little bit less, maybe it's close to 50% or something like that. But even still, far more white Americans, yet the rate is 25%, which means there are a lot more white Americans than Black Americans who are growing up in single parent households. This is a huge problem. And so this is something that's affecting everybody. And we have to be able to talk about the role of fathers, the role of family, and how the degrade and the numbers keep increasing and how it's affecting boys, right? But the only time we want to talk about boys is when they act out, when they do something like a mass shooting, when they hurt other people, right? We don't even really talk about them when they kill themselves. So that's not enough.
No, we don't at all. Yeah.
They have to hurt other people, right? They have to do something that is detrimental to society. Then we'll notice them, but we'll only notice them to say how detrimental they are.
Well, I'd like to point something out. We don't even talk about them when they kill other men their age. Like, if you most of that violence in Chicago, I don't know, but I'm going to guess it's probably young men between 18 and 24 killing each other.
Yeah.
Right. Like, that's probably what that is. Probably young Black men, honestly, killing each other in Chicago. That's probably what it is. And we don't talk about that very much because I guess we don't care unless they go into, a school or a TOPS or whatever and do it en masse. Let me read a super chat. G-Man says, any 2A critic who says an unarmed populace couldn't stand up to the force of an oppressive government, only look at Uvalde. One lunatic had 20 officers outside pissing their pants, waiting for backup. Yeah, I mean, the thing that bothers me about there's a couple things that bother me about the response of people in that situation. Everyone's focusing on how long it took. And I think it did take like an hour for police to enter the classroom that he was barricaded in. And I assume he just killing everyone in the classroom or shooting everyone in the class. Like, it took them a long time. And they had 911 calls where they knew that there was people in there that were a threat. It's not clear if there's a communication breakdown or whatever. But so there's problems on law enforcement side. But one of the things that struck me, and I mentioned this to you before the show, Adam, no one's mentioning there was shooting outside the school for 12 full minutes. 12 minutes. And I just thought to myself, man, if I'm in a school, if I'm a teacher in a school or a kid in a school, and someone's shooting a gun out on the front lawn for 12 minutes, I wouldn't be in the school by the time he came in the school. Like, I would be long gone. Like, this would be okay, someone's outside shooting guns. Let's get the F out, right? Like, lock the doors and get out. Get out. And the strange thing to me is this protocol of, well, someone's outside shooting, so what we do is barricade ourselves in our classrooms and cower under the desks and just hope that it's like, pray that it's not happening. Wait for law enforcement. I just, as a father, I mean, I had a conversation with my daughter about this because obviously she hears about it at school because it's, they talk about it. And, I was like, look, if someone's shooting on the front lawn, I'd just run out the back door and keep running. Like, just don't stop until you collapse from exhaustion. Just run. Like, I don't know what, I can't imagine the mindset of there's someone on the front lawn of our school shooting or across the street and we're just going to sit here. Am I the only one are you freaked out by that? I just don't get it.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. Actually, I don't know if you've ever seen the Daily Wire movie Run, Hide, Fight. Have you ever seen that?
No.
It's actually a really good movie. It's a really good movie, but the basis of it is the lead character is a girl who's at school. She eventually escapes herself. She gets out of the school, but realizes she's the only one that's out of the school. And so she's not under the radar of anybody as of yet. So she takes it upon herself, like, I got to get people out of here. And so she's going to classrooms saying, get out, right? They're in the classrooms with the teacher and they're just sitting there waiting because that's part of the lockdown protocol is to sit there. And she says, you need to get out. It is dangerous. Go now. And so she's the hero because she's telling people to do what you're actually supposed to do. You're supposed to leave. You're supposed to get out of danger. And so she's getting them out of the school. So she's kind of the hero in the story. But I was telling you before the show, we had a scare at the Elizabeth Mall here in Jersey, where it's actually kind of funny for a second because I was literally Googling gun facts. Like, I'm just like looking up. Yeah, I'm like semi-automatic and I'm just looking up different stuff. And then all of a sudden I hear a panic, I hear a commotion, and I look up and I could see into the hallway of the mall, people running frantically. And all of a sudden, like, some people started coming into the back, and in a matter of moments, people are saying, like, they're shooting. They're like, oh shit. So I come back into the dressing room. My wife is getting changed, but she hears the commotion, and her perspective is kind of like, she's getting dressed. She hears craziness. So she stops and listens to hear if, like, were there gunshots or something. So she opened the door and she saw me standing right there. People started piling into the dressing rooms at first. Then the employees said, go into the back area. So we went into the back area where they keep all the inventory. And so we're standing there. But the only thing I could think to myself is, we're fucking sitting ducks. Like, why are we sitting here? Yeah. Like, I understand they have a lockdown protocol, which in some ways is good. Like, close the doors to the stores to try to prevent them from coming in there easily, right? But every mall has a back exit. They have an exit right there. Like, why are we standing right here? Everybody who can should be getting the hell out of the building if there's in fact a threat, a potential threat. And if it's a false alarm, it's a false alarm, right? Why are we sitting here? And the other thing that crossed my mind is I'm in a state where you can't open carry. Right. We're sitting ducks. So if someone actually did want to come back here, well, I guess it's just me, standing in front of a bullet for my wife and I die and hoping that she doesn't get shot. Like, that's the reality when it comes to stuff like this. Thankfully, it was a false alarm. It was some sort of like a large group of kids came in and created some like loud noise, and I guess people are on edge. And two people start running, then other people start running and say one thing. So I can understand like you can create a panic in a matter of seconds. You see a couple people running in a direction. It's probably a good idea to start running too. So I just thought to myself, like, why are we sitting right here? Why are we sitting in this spot if there's in fact someone who is maniacal and walking around and actually wants to shoot people? Like, we need to get out the exit. There's an exit door standing right there. Let's fucking go.
Yeah.
To me, that was the craziest thing I could think of. And it's the same thing with these schools. Like, I can understand to a degree if they're shooting outside and there's a misunderstanding or miscommunication, you don't know where the shooting is coming from. Like, all you hear is loud noises. You don't know if it's in the front, back side, wherever. Sure. But at some point, someone has to say, get out. We have to get out. You got
12 minutes to figure out where it's coming from. So, I mean.
Right. Exactly. So, I get it to a degree where you want to lock down, but lockdown only makes sense if you actually lock down. Like, to my understanding, the door was able to be open. So what kind of lockdown is that?
He got in. So I don't know. Yeah, right. He got into the school and to a classroom. So I don't know the details, but yeah, it wasn't even that great of a lockdown. I think one of the girls, a 9-year-old, survived by climbing out a window and running away. I'm like, okay. Like doing the obvious thing, right? So I mean, it's just, look, I mean, I can geek out on tactics stuff, right? I can geek out on this kind of stuff just because it's my personality. But ultimately, we shouldn't really be having to have conversations about the best way to protect fourth graders from not getting murdered in their school by a mad gunman. So, I mean, but that kind of stuff it does fascinate me, and I don't understand the mentality of these people who are just like, let's cower and wait. Let's just cower and wait. That just, maybe it works sometimes, I guess, but how many times does running out the back door not work? I don't know. I mean, it seems like that's a better technique.
So,
Dion,
to answer, someone asked, how come I didn't go through the exit? Is because we were prevented from going through the exit. That's why. It wasn't just us. It's not like it was in a store of 2 people. There were a lot of people that were there, and we were prevented from leaving the exit. They had closed the door and locked it. So
they locked the exit?
Because it has an alarm. So initially, actually, here's the thing. Initially, because we weren't in the front of the people who were initially going into the back. We were somewhere like in the middle. And so initially they were saying, go through the exit, right? And then some people started going through the exit. The alarm started going off, and that freaked them out because that would trigger, if someone's walking around with a gun, that there's people over here. So they closed the door, and they had a key and they had to lock it to shut the alarm off. So that's why we didn't go through the exit. I was ready to go through, and they had stopped it, a number of people just before us. So they said for us to go through the side into the inventory area. So that's why we didn't leave. I was ready to get the fuck out of there.
I mean, I'm glad it was a false alarm.
Yeah, me too.
But social pressure stops us from doing a lot of things, right? Like, you don't want to be the asshole that runs through the door and sets off the alarm in the case where it's a false alarm. But in the case where it's a real shooting, it's probably okay to be the asshole that sets off the fire alarm barging through the back door, right? Like,
yeah.
You know,
but you know what? I know you're not from New Jersey. But anybody who's from New Jersey,
I did live in Camden, or I lived in Cherry Hill and worked in Camden for a while. So yes, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, you're in South Jersey. Okay, Elizabeth is right next to Newark, and even Elizabeth is a little bit of a rough area. So I'm pretty analytical, and I'm thinking about all these different things in that moment. In my head, because actually that mall has had shootings before, just so you know.
Okay.
So they had shootings. Actually, I think one of them was on a Black Friday. They had a shooting, which is like the worst time to have some sort of shooting like that. But they've had shootings before, and they were conflict related, right? So we're kind of like in a rough area.
So you're figuring
come in there,
some gang thing, yeah.
Exactly. That's that is more likely, and actually that's actually happened where there were shootings at the location. So hiding away so that you don't get shot by some stray bullet or something like that makes most sense there. So that's kind of where my head was at. It's kind of like, all right, let's stay calm, and even though I was ready to go through the back, they stopped. It was like, okay, but more likely this is like some gang thing or some fighting thing. And it involves some young kids who cause a bunch of trouble. So that's why I wasn't thinking in that way of some maniacal persons going store by store trying to kill people.
Yeah, it is rare that happens. I mean, as much as we gets in the news, it is rare. G-Man says the sheriff was whining about needing more equipment after they had everything they needed. Taxpayers can't fund courage. Didn't expect this from Texas. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there was my understanding is there's no equipment problems other than maybe no one was communicating to the person in charge on the scene. But yeah, I mean, you can't fund courage. Dion says there was a video on Twitter where they talked to someone who supposedly knew the shooter. This is Uvalde, and he said he was a bully and that he did hurt animals and was not a good person. So maybe not a history of convictions or anything, but at least kind of known to be not a great person.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it's tough, man. I don't know. Well, look, Adam, how can people follow you? Where can they find your work online? This has been a great conversation. How can people get more of you?
You can follow me mostly on Twitter these days, at wrong_speak, just like you see on the screen. And you can also follow me on Instagram, same handle on Facebook, wrongspeakadam, facebook.com/wrongspeakadam. Or you can just go to wrongspeak.net if you want to send a message, or if you ever want to write an article for WrongSpeak. Just tell me what you want to write about, and we'll discuss it from there. As far as my book, you can purchase it on wrongspeak.net, as well as signed copies. Or you can go to Amazon, you can get an ebook, or you get the paperback. And the paperback is also available on barnesandnoble.com.
Cool. Well, look, man, thank you very much for joining. It was a great pleasure to talk to you, and I'm sure we'll have you back. But in the meantime, take care.
Thank you.
Everyone, thanks for watching. We will see you on, I actually don't know what shows are coming up, but at least this Wednesday there's a Dangerous Thoughts, and on Friday I have an interview with Axel Kaiser to talk about Chile's imminent Marxist constitution, which should be interesting. So bye, everyone. Have a good week, and I'll see you later. Thanks for sticking around until the end. If you're new to Unsafe Space, check out our deep content library that includes discussions with everyone from James Lindsay to Brett Weinstein. And please consider helping to fund our work by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on a variety of social media platforms, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space Discord server, which is open to financial supporters at any level. We hope to see you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production does not meet WHO health and safety standards. Please report to a United Nations Sanitization Center immediately. Association with the following individuals is strictly prohibited. Experts who benefit from printing money agree that printing money does not cause price inflation. Trust me, just 2 more weeks to slow the spread of monkeypox. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks of the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.